The story of Oedipus is perhaps one of the most tragic of the Greek myths, and that's saying something. A tale of accidental despair and unfortunate disaster, the famed King of Thebes and his harrowing legend remain as well known today as ever. So, who was Oedipus and why is he remembered? Let's find out together right now. The story of Oedipus begins before his birth. Laius, the childless king of Thebes, decided to consult the oracle at Delphi to learn if he and his wife Jocasta would ever have any children. To his utter dismay, instead he was warned to not pursue a child, for any son born was destined to kill him. Taking this advice very much to heart, Laius tried staying away from his wife's bed as much as he could, but his resilience was undone by a night of revels and sweet-tasting wine. Jocasta fell pregnant and, in due time, gave birth to a baby boy. In an attempt to avoid the prophecy becoming true, Laius told his servants to pierce the baby's ankles so that it would not be able to even crawl, let alone cause him harm. Afterwards, so as to be even safer, he gave his son to a servant, telling him to leave the baby in the mountains to die. The servant, unable to do such a thing, instead handed the baby over to a shepherd who tended his flock on that same mountain. A Corinthian, the shepherd took pity on the boy and brought him to the court of King Polybus and Queen Merope of Corinth. The royal couple, also childless, decided to adopt the poor baby and raise him as their own. They named the boy after his ankle wounds. Oedipus means swollen foot. Many happy years later, a grown Oedipus was told by a drunkard one day that Polybus and Merope were not his birth parents. Oedipus confronted the king and queen with the accusation, but they denied it. Unsatisfied, Oedipus travelled to the same oracle in Delphi that his birth parents had consulted. The oracle informed him that he was destined to murder his father and marry his mother. Believing this to reference the king and queen of Corinth, and in an attempt to avoid such a fate, he decided not to return home to Corinth, but to travel instead to Thebes, which was closer to Delphi. On his way to Thebes, the first of several desperately tragic moments in his life would occur, the significance of which was fully unbeknownst to him at the time. At a narrow three-way intersection near Davlia, he came across a chariot carrying King Laius, his biological father. Unaware of the man's true identity, Oedipus and Laius' charioteer started quarrelling over who had the right of way. The quarrel ended up with Oedipus killing both the charioteer and his father, thus unknowingly fulfilling the first half of the prophecy. Only one of Laius' servants managed to save his life from the wrath of Oedipus and make his escape. Soon after, Oedipus came across the terrible Sphinx who had plagued the region of Thebes for some time, destroying crops and devouring travellers who had either refused to answer her riddle or answered it incorrectly. The Sphinx asked Oedipus the same question she had asked the unfortunate ones before him. What walks on 4 feet in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 3 at night? No one had ever answered the question correctly before, but Oedipus thought carefully and eventually solved the riddle. Man, he answered, who crawls on all fours as a baby, then on 2 legs as an adult, and then with a walking stick when in old age. The Sphinx, unable to bear the fact that her riddle had been answered correctly, hurled herself off the rock she was sitting on and to her death. Following the death of the king at the unbeknowing hands of Oedipus, Thebes had an interim ruler, Creon, the brother of the widowed Jocasta and Oedipus' uncle. Creon had decreed that anyone who could manage to kill the Sphinx would be rewarded the hand of the queen and the throne of Thebes. Consequently, unbeknownst to him, or, for that matter, anyone else, Oedipus' reward for rescuing Thebes from the Sphinx would end up being a most bitter one, his father's crown and marriage to his mother. Neither recognizing the other, Oedipus and Jocasta would have 4 children together. Many years later, Thebes is hit with a terrible plague. Oedipus, determined to cure his city, does everything in his power to get to the bottom of the matter. And after Creon returns from a consultation with the oracle at Delphi, with the news that the plague is divine retribution for the killer of Laius never being taken to justice, Oedipus gives a solemn oath to find him and punish him severely. Creon suggests that they try to find the blind prophet Tiresias, who was widely respected. Oedipus sent for Tiresias, who warned him not to seek Laius' killer. In a heated exchange, Tiresias was provoked into exposing Oedipus himself as the killer, and the fact that Oedipus was living in shame because he did not know who his true parents were. Oedipus angrily blamed Creon for the false accusations, sensing a plot to overthrow his rule and leading to a heated argument. Jocasta tried to comfort Oedipus and, in the process, informed him about the events which led to the death of her husband. They sound strikingly similar to his chance encounter with the unknown charioteer at Davlia, and, visibly shaken, Oedipus sends for the sole survivor of the murder to hear a first-hand account, fearing that he had in fact been the one to kill Laius. Before the servant arrives, however, a messenger from Corinth enters the court and informs everyone that King Polybus has died. Still believing that Polybus is his real father, Oedipus is somewhat relieved to hear this, as it renders the prophecy false. However, fearing that the second part of the prophecy may still materialise, he declines to attend the funeral in order to avoid meeting his mother. The messenger informs Oedipus that he doesn't need to worry about that. He knows full well that Polybus and Merope aren't his real parents, but he is the very same shepherd who handed them the ankle-pierced Oedipus when he was still a baby, the very same baby that was the son of King Laius and Queen Jocasta. The truth finally becomes clear to Jocasta, that the prophecy had come true, and she had indeed married her own son and the killer of her husband, and she flees in despair. The summoned survivor of the late king's murder arrives and gives his description of the scene to Oedipus, who, upon hearing the details, feels his heart sink as the realization sweeps throughout his body. The prophecy was real. He was the son of Jocasta. He had killed his own father and married his mother. Desperately searching for Jocasta, he eventually found her lifeless body. She had hung herself in despair. Consumed with sorrow, Oedipus tears out a golden pin from her gown and uses it to blind himself. As he had promised to do to the killer of Laius, he then banished himself from the city, eventually dying whilst in the company of King Theseus of Athens. A tragic tale of cruel prophecy and extremely unfortunate events. A story that speaks of how highly the power and importance of fate was considered in the ancient Greek world. No matter how much the characters attempted to avoid the fates foretold for them, in the end, and unknowingly to them all, their journeys played out exactly as predicted. I will leave you then with a simple question. Do you believe in fate? Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more great stories. Cheers.